In a first-past-the-post electoral system, voters cast their vote for a candidate of their choice, and the candidate who receives the most votes wins. FPTP is a plurality voting method, and is primarily used in systems that use single-member electoral divisions. FPTP is used as the primary form of allocating seats for legislative elections in about a third of the world's countries, mostly in the English-speaking world. Many countries use FPTP alongside proportional representation. For example, in a parallel voting system or as part of a mixed-member proportional representation system. In some countries that elect their legislatures by proportional representation, FPTP is used to elect their head of state. FPTP can be used for single and multiple member electoral divisions. In a single-member election, the candidate with the highest number the same number of votes as there are positions to be filled, and those elected are the highest placed candidates corresponding to that number of positions. For example, if there are 3 vacancies, then voters cast up to 3 votes and the 3 candidates with the greatest number of votes are elected. The multiple round election voting method uses the FPTP voting method in each of 2 rounds. The first round, held according to block voting rules, determines which candidates may progress to the second and final round. Under a first-past-the-post voting method, the highest polling candidate is elected. In this real-life illustration from the 2011 Singaporean presidential election, presidential candidate Tony Tan obtained a greater number of votes than any of the other candidates. Therefore, he was declared the winner. Although the second-placed candidate had an inferior margin of only 0.35% and a majority of voters did not vote for Tony Tan. The effect of a system based on plurality voting spread over a number of separate districts is that the larger parties, and parties with more geographically concentrated support, gain a disproportionately large share of seats, while smaller parties with more evenly distributed support gain a disproportionately small share. It is more likely that a single party will hold a majority of legislative seats. In the United Kingdom, 19 of the 24 general elections since 1922 have produced a single-party majority government. For example, the 2005 general election results were as follows. In this example, Labour took a majority of the seats with only 36% of the vote. The largest 2 parties took 69% of the vote and 88% of the seats. In contrast, the Liberal Democrats took more than 20% of the vote but only about 10% of the seats. FPTP wastes fewer votes when it is used in 2-party contests. Waste of votes and minority governments are more likely when large groups of voters vote for 3, 4 or more parties, as in Canadian elections. Canada uses FPTP and only 2 of the last 6 federal Canadian elections produced single-party majority governments. Supporters of FPTP argue that its concept is easy to understand, and ballots can more easily be counted and processed than those in preferential voting systems. FPTP often produces governments which have legislative voting majorities, thus providing such governments the legislative power necessary to implement their electoral manifesto commitments during their term in office. This may be beneficial for the country in question in circumstances where the government's legislative agenda has broad public support, or at least benefits society as a whole. However, handing a legislative voting majority to a government which lacks popular support can be problematic where said government's policies favor only that fraction of the electorate that supported it. Supporters of FPTP also argue that the use of proportional representation may enable smaller parties to become decisive in the country's legislature and gain leverage they wouldn't otherwise enjoy. They argue that FPTP generally reduces this possibility, except where parties have a strong regional basis. A journalist at Haaretz noted that Israel's highly proportional Knesset affords great power to relatively small parties, forcing the government to give in to political blackmail and to reach compromises. Tony Blair, defending FPTP, argued that other systems give small parties the balance of power and influence disproportionate to their votes. Allowing people into parliament who did not finish first in their district was described by David Cameron as creating a parliament full of second choices who no one really wanted but didn't really object to either. Winston Churchill criticized the alternative vote system as determined by the most worthless votes given for the most worthless candidates. First past the post is most often criticized for its failure to reflect the popular vote in the number of parliamentary, legislative seats awarded to competing parties. Critics argue that a fundamental requirement of an election system is to accurately